In DC, for DC. DC Radio, 96.3 HD4 and DCRadio.gov.
Hello, I'm Doxy McCoy, sitting in for your regular host, Sandra Mattavous-Frye, People's Counsel for the District of Columbia, and welcome to OPC Radio Connect. We are excited to be on DC Radio to talk about the work of the Office of the People's Counsel. OPC, as we are known, advocates on behalf of all district utility consumers. Our mission is to advocate, educate, and protect consumers of natural gas, electric, telephone, and now water services in all 8 wards of the district. I serve as OPC's Public Information Officer. On OPC Radio Connect, we will bring you information about a variety of issues related to utilities, energy efficiency tips, the environment and climate change, and how that all figures into your daily living. You will hear from OPC staff, experts, and other advocates. In this segment, we want to talk about your rights as utility consumers. Our guests are OPC staff members. Lawrence Daniels is Director of Litigation, and Grace Soderberg is an Assistant People's Counsel in OPC's new Water Service Division. Both are attorneys, and by the way, we like to say, OPC is your utility lawyer. Welcome, and thank you, lawyers, for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Thank you, Doxy.
Lawrence, tell me a little bit about what you do at OPC.
In my role as Director of Litigation, I have the responsibility of managing a number of attorneys whose purpose is to advise the People's Counsel on a wide range of policy issues that affect utility consumers who receive natural gas, electric, telephone, and water service.
And Grace, you are relatively new to OPC. Tell us what you do.
Yes, I am the Assistant People's Counsel in a new Water Services Division. OPC now has this new authority under a legislation that was passed last year, and that was the DC Water Consumer Protection Amendment Act of 2018. So after that legislation passed, we created a new Water Services Division. So with this new law, OPC is now the statutory advocate of DC water ratepayers and consumers, the same way we have been the statutory advocate for over 40 years for electric, gas, and local telephone service. And what this means for this new authority is now OPC can represent these ratepayers in rulemakings that affect all the ratepayers in the District of Columbia, as well as individual complaints for specific customers.
Thank you, Grace, and thank you, Lawrence. Now to get to the subject at hand, your rights as utility consumers. District residents indeed have rights when it comes to their electric, natural gas, local telephone, and water services, as both of my guests have said. Lawrence, tell me the underlying right that utility consumers have.
Well, in exchange for paying for utility service, consumers have the right to receive quality utility service at reasonable rates.
Grace, or Lawrence, tell me who determines what quality of service is and what are the reasonable rates?
The DC Public Service Commission is the regulator of utility service with the exception of water, as Grace will explain later. DC Public Service Commission establishes quality of service standards by looking at a number of engineering factors, factors that impact the infrastructure, and also quality, service standards. And they come up with what is called a quality of service standards. And every year, natural gas, electric, and telephone companies must meet these quality of service standards or face a fine. Now, when it comes to rates, the DC Public Service Commission looks at accounting, economic, and also testimony from utility consumers and from the utility company to determine the amount of money that the utility needs to cover their cost and also make a reasonable profit. So that's how they determine rates.
And Grace, tell me what role OPC plays in ensuring consumers exercise their rights.
Well, on the water side, OPC is also now your utility lawyer. But as Lawrence said, the structure is different on the water side. DC Water is not regulated by the Public Service Commission. They're self-regulated, and they're overseen by their DC Water Board. At the same time, OPC can still represent the consumers. And we've done that in a rate adjustment this past year, similar to how we represent on the electric and gas side in rate proceedings. OPC was involved in the CRE Act, the Clean Rivers Impervious Area Charge rulemaking, and the sewer rate adjustment. And what we did was that OPC filed extensive comments, and we testified in a public hearing before the DC Water Board. And our theme throughout the proceeding was that there was a lack of openness and transparency and lack of public participation. The result, though, is a positive result. Now DC Water is instituting more processes for more transparency and public participation. And we also got involved in another proceeding, which is the Customer Assistance Program, and that's CAP 2, and that's some type of assistance for middle-income consumers. We supported the extension of that CAP program and for there be a more permanent, sustainable source. And beyond these rulemakings that affect all DC ratepayers, we also get involved in individual complaints. Since the inception of the Water Services Division, we have handled over 300 individual customer complaints.
So I was about to say, Grace, that Water Service Division has been pretty busy.
Yes, we have been busy, indeed.
Lawrence, what is the Consumer Bill of Rights, and tell me how it came into existence?
The Utility Consumer Bill of Rights is an important document that is a set of rules that lays out the rights of consumers and the responsibility of utility consumers. It came to be actually out of the Office of the People's Counsel. In 1976, the very first appointed People's Counsel, Anise Wagner, proposed the concept of a Bill of Rights for utility consumers. And a working group was formed shortly thereafter. And in 1979, the Commission adopted the very first Utility Consumer Bill of Rights for the District of Columbia. It covers a wide range of areas that deal with utility service, such as meter reading, security deposits, terminations, and reconnection of service, and most importantly, a process for the resolution of complaints. And like I said, 1979 is when it was first adopted. And for 25 years, it pretty much stayed in place with the exception of a few amendments. Now, in 1999 and 2000, the Council passed a number of laws that introduced the concept of choice, retail choice for consumers. Previous to that, you could only receive your gas, electric, and telephone service from a monopoly provider, just one utility for each service. But after retail choice came to be, consumers now had an option to choose third-party suppliers. These are companies that could provide electric, gas, or telephone service. So as we started to see that consumer rights still had to be protected, so we expanded the Consumer Bill of Rights to, again, show what the rights of consumers were and the responsibilities of these third-party suppliers were to ensure that consumers will be able to make an informed choice based upon good information. And I like to say also that now we're going through another shift in the industry, utility industry. Technology is allowing consumers who were once just consuming electricity actually to be able to produce electricity and to share that commodity back to the utility company. People are also able to do battery storage. We're electrifying our transportation network. So again, OPC sees a need to expand the Consumer Bill of Rights and to make sure that consumers' rights are protected and that the responsibility of those providers, be they the monopoly provider or a third-party service, that they're doing things in a way that the public interest is served. And our Consumer Bill of Rights is actually seen as one of the most comprehensive Consumer Bill of Rights in the United States.
And hasn't there been, like in the last couple of years, hasn't OPC reviewed the Consumer Bill of Rights to see, you mentioned the changing industry, but is there a review underway or in the last year to see whether or not it needed to be upgraded? Yes,
we've taken a look and proposed some new rules for, again, third-party suppliers. And the reason was that there are some third-party suppliers, not all, but some, that actually manipulate consumers. And they usually go after those who are the most financially vulnerable. And they would perhaps, represent themselves as an agent of Pepco or Washington Gas, or say that you could get a discount on your service. And consumers would actually sign up for that service. Initially, the rates would be lower than what Washington Gas or Pepco was providing. But then after about 3 or 4 months, that rate would skyrocket to market rates. And at that point, the consumers has a bill that they just can't pay. And so we've introduced a couple new proposals to rein them in a bit, to make sure that they are being honest, to ensure the consumers' rights are protected.
So needless to say, OPC is on the case.
Absolutely.
Grace, talk about the Consumer Bill of Rights as it relates to water services.
For the Water Consumer Bill of Rights, it has a newer history. So under the legislation, OPC was tasked for being part of a working group, and that working group included OPC, DC Water, and the Department of Energy and the Environment, DOEE. And we were tasked to work on the Water Consumer Bill of Rights. And that Bill of Rights lays out the rights and responsibilities of DC Water, as well as the rights and responsibilities of its customers. So once that was finalized, and DC Water had the obligation to do that, to have that be final under the legislation, OPC made sure the ratepayers knew about it. So we had various outreach events in all 8 wards throughout the District of Columbia. We also created a one-pager guide to the Water Bill of Rights to help have a more layman's view of what it entails. And we also have the full Bill of Rights on the OPC website. And we also cite to the corresponding DC regulations on the website as well.
So I would like to say that one of the goals of OPC is to get the word out to consumers about the Bill of Rights, whether it be dealing with electric and natural gas or whether it be dealing with water. And so, as you mentioned, we do that in a variety of ways. We go out to community events. We put together documents, easy brochures for people to see, and then we put them on our website. And so that folks can go and look at these documents. They can download them as well. They can pick them up at our community events. Lawrence, if you could pick one right that is most important for a consumer to know about and that they should exercise, what should that be?
There's one provision in the Bill of Rights that states that once a complaint has been filed by a consumer for their account, that service cannot be disconnected while the dispute is pending before the D.C. Public Service Commission, provided that the consumer pays the non-disputed portion of the bill, that being that portion that they think is not fair. I think that's important because consumers should not be leveraged in a way to say that, well, you better pay this bill even though you don't think it's fair before you can actually have your complaint resolved. So the commission allows you the opportunity to file a complaint and stop the process of disconnection. Using third-party suppliers as an example, again, people can have a bill that may be $400 or $500 for 1 month from a third-party supplier. The consumer may find that to be unfair, file a complaint, and then the commission would start the process of hearing that. Stephen Morenzik is one of our outreach specialists, and he does a great job of helping to adjust those bills through that complaint process. And it saved numerous consumers hundreds and thousands of dollars throughout the city. So I think that particular provision that allows you to stay connected to the service is probably one of the most important rights in the Bill of Rights.
And Grace, what would you say is a key right for water consumers to exercise?
I think the key right is the overarching right that they have a right to a statutory attorney. We are your utility lawyer. When you have us as your lawyer, we're your zealous advocate for whatever your issues are. And because we are the experts, we can craft a solution and help you get to a positive resolution of your issue.
And as I said earlier, we do have a number of brochures. You can find the Consumer Bill of Rights on our website, and our website is opc-dc.gov. Again, that's opc-dc.gov. In fact, we recently published a colorful brochure that opens up to a poster, and it's called Take Command of Your Utility Rights. And this document will lay out several rights that you should exercise. It also has information about services, social services agencies that can help you if you cannot pay your water bill, your electric bill, your gas bill, even your local telephone bill. And you can request those copies of our office. You can call our office at 202-727-3071. Again, we can be reached at 202-727-3071. Now, Grace, if a consumer calls OPC and they have or about to lose their water services, tell me what they should do in order to exercise their rights, or what might OPC do to help them?
Well, first of all, I think they made a great step in the first instance by calling OPC, because we can put all resources in helping them out. So it really depends on our situation. It's a case-specific situation. So let's say they are about to be turned off. Well, we can help craft the payment plan so that they won't be turned off. We can also help with getting late payment fees off their account. Let's say they are turned off. We can find out more about ways to get them turned on. We can help with partnering and showing them where they can go with social services agencies that can help them. And also, if they were not able to resolve their dispute, it does go to a more formal process, and that's called an administrative hearing. OPC is your lawyer there. We will represent you and zealously represent you in that proceeding as well.
So tell us a success story. I am aware that there was a property owner who exercised her rights in calling OPC when she had an issue. Tell us about that.
Yes, and that property owner is actually a good example, because they were a success story along the way, but also it demonstrates the life cycle of a complaint that goes all the way towards an administrative hearing and an appeal. So for that homeowner, they reached out to us after they've been trying to resolve a dispute for over 5 months back in 2018. And that dispute dealt with water bills over $2,600. So this customer couldn't figure out why the bills were so high, because she did her due diligence. She checked for leaks, and she didn't find any leaks in her property. She reached out to DC Water, made numerous calls, but never got resolution from them. So she found out about OPC. She called us. She was able to see one of our staff members that very day. She was able to see Rashida Boyd, who's one of our customer service specialists. So she was the intake person and found out what her situation was. Unfortunately, we couldn't resolve it informally, so we had to go to an administrative hearing. And I represented them in that administrative hearing, that formal process. That customer had the burden of proof, so we had to bring our case and show the administrative hearing officer why this customer should prevail. And she did prevail. A month later, we had a positive order that came out in the customer's favor a month later. However, DC Water decided to appeal. So we fought that appeal for 4 more months. We continued to file filings in response to their contentions. So in the same time, the customer had to wait another 4 months to get resolution. So just last month, the hearing officer came out with a decision in the customer's favor. We're thrilled about that. She finally has a resolution after over a year, and it was a positive resolution in that regard too.
So the bottom line is this property owner was smart enough to know that she had a right to challenge. There are a lot of us out there that may not know that we get a big bill and we just accept it. We don't question it. We talk among our family and among our neighbors, my bill is so high and I can't figure it out. But the point that we want to make to the consumer is that you have a right to challenge. And you may not be able to do it on your own, but that's what OPC is for. OPC is here for you to call us and to see if we are not always successful, but there are success stories. And Lawrence, can you tell us a success story?
Yeah, there was a couple years ago, a young lady came to the office, and she was living in a house that used to belong to her father. Her father had passed away the year before, and she was staying there. And she came to us with a bill, and she said, "I don't know who this provider is. I get my gas from Washington Gas." And she said, we asked her a series of questions, and we reviewed the bill, and we saw the name of a third-party supplier. So we investigated, and we asked the third-party supplier to provide proof that she had actually changed service, had requested change from Washington Gas to their service. And what they presented was a document that was signed by her father, but it was signed several months after he had passed away. So that just shows you some of the deception that can take place by some of these providers. So she was able to go to the D.C. Public Service Commission and present that strong set of evidence to say that my service, I was slammed. That's a process called slamming, where somebody changes your service without your permission. So we were able to get those charges reversed through the formal complaint process at the D.C. Public Service Commission.
We want you to know that you are listening to OPC Radio Connect. I am Doxy McCoy, and I am sitting in for People's Counsel Sandra Mattavous-Frye. And OPC Legal Eagles are our guests. They are Lawrence Daniels and Grace Soderberg. And we're talking about utility consumer rights and the Bill of Rights. Again, there's a Consumer Bill of Rights for natural gas, electric, local telephone, and then there's a Consumer Bill of Rights for water services. And we just want consumers to be aware, we want listeners to be aware that you have an opportunity to challenge if you feel that your bill is too high. You have an opportunity to challenge if you're about to be cut off, and OPC is here for you to call us at 202-727-3071. Again, we're at 202-727-3071. I am looking at a document that OPC produced, and it's called Know Your Utility Consumer Rights. It's a palm card that we hand out at our different events, and it lists the Consumer Bill of Rights. It lists some of the points, and it says the Consumer Bill of Rights provides safeguards for consumers of natural gas, electricity, and telecommunication services in the competitive utility markets in the District of Columbia, and it's also known as the Seaboard. It defines the relationship and responsibilities of both utility service and providers and consumers. And one of the points that it mentions, Lawrence, is when you are starting your utility service, utility representatives must produce identification to consumers. Talk about that.
Yes, it's important that you understand who you're dealing with. And the Bill of Rights lays out, again, what the responsibilities of utility providers must do. Namely, properly identify yourself so the consumer understands who they're actually talking to. So I think at the threshold level, the consumer has the right to understand that I am dealing with a true representative from this utility company. And then beyond that, the Bill of Rights lays out the message that has to be conveyed, all the points that the consumer should receive before they actually decide whether or not they're going to take that service.
And one of the other points that it makes, it says Social Security numbers are not required to initiate service. We try to emphasize to consumers that they need to keep their personal information private. When possibly a third-party supplier might knock on their door, they might give them a call, and they might ask for your account number. Yes. They might ask for just some private information. And Grace, we always want to make the point that it's your right to question anyone that comes to your door, or question anyone that calls you to say that I'm going to save you such and such amount of money. Talk about that.
Well, there's been a trend generally in the utility business. We would call them kind of like Utilities United Against Scams. We hear about these kind of third-party entities who pretend to be part of the utility company. So always be alert. Ask for the identification. And your utility company will tell you when they will be going out there. You know, there's a door knocker or there's some type of phone call or a text to you. So be an active consumer. Question that. Because there's a lot of scams going on right now.
One other point that it makes is that utilities cannot require first-time customers to pay a security deposit. Talk about that, Lawrence.
Yes. I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, you don't have to put up money to get service in the District of Columbia. And there are other jurisdictions where you actually have to do that. And I think that's we found that was an unnecessary burden. So when you sign up, you're going to establish your payment history and essentially your credit with them by your performance going forward, not by any other measure, anything that may have happened in the past. Again, utility service is vital. So you shouldn't have barriers to obtaining these important services because they govern so much of what you do in your life. I mean, with your electricity, it's with powering up your home. With your gas, it's heating and cooking. And with telephone, it's communication. So these services should not have an impediment, such as a security deposit, just a start service.
Do you find that consumers, how would you characterize consumers in terms of what they know about what they can and cannot do? We know that there are some, like the property owner that you mentioned, we know there are people who will read the fine print, but we also know that there are people who won't. How would you characterize the consumer public out there, Grace?
Well, it's a whole range of knowledge and advocacy. It's a continuum. There are some that are more involved and are pretty savvy, but frankly, there are some who just pay the bill, don't read the fine print, because really, you have your life. There's so many things going on. The last thing you're thinking about is your utility service. You only worry about it when it's not there. So that's where OPC comes in. That's why we do these outreach events, to reach the common person, to help explain in common layman's terms what their rights mean.
Yeah, and to that point, I think consumers are becoming more aware. At one point in time, utility service was pretty simple. I mean, you paid it, you got it, everything was good. But I think now that it's becoming more interactive, utility issues are becoming more a part of the general conversation. And as that conversation goes on, we're becoming more a part of that conversation by saying, we're here to help you to enforce your rights.
And we'd like to think that OPC has a big role in getting the word out there to let folks know that they have rights and that they are able to give us a call and we are able to help them. So we are almost ready to close out of this edition of OPC Radio Connect. Before we say so long, until the next time, if you will indulge me, a bit of nostalgia. In my past career, I was a producer and reporter for Black Entertainment Television, BET News and Public Affairs. And in this building is where DC Radio is broadcasting, is the same location where I used to produce BET shows and inform the national audience about issues of importance to African Americans and Americans at large. I'm excited to come full circle to this DC radio location to talk about the issues of importance to the people of the District of Columbia, as well as topics of national significance related to consumer advocacy, utility service, and energy. I'd like to thank Lawrence Daniels and Grace Soderberg for educating our listeners about utility consumer rights. Both of you contribute to OPC becoming is the premier advocacy agency serving residents in all areas of the District of Columbia. We hope that you will join us on future podcasts as we make all aware that OPC can help if you have a problem with your utilities. We welcome your feedback. Email us at info@opc-dc.gov. Contact us through social media, Facebook, at DC People's Counsel, and Counsel is spelled COUNSEL. We're on Twitter at DCOPC, or give us a call at 202-727-3071. Check out our website, and you can find all kinds of documents. Sign up for the OPC Connection, our newsletter. Get our press releases and consumer alerts. Until next time, I'm Doxy McCoy, sitting in for People's Counsel Sandra Mattavous-Frye, and you've been listening to OPC Radio Connect on DC Radio.
In DC, for DC, DC Radio, 96.3 HD4, and DCRadio.gov.